Hi, welcome. We're back with Fairport Forward for our second episode, and we're going to talk about that really exciting topic that we teased last time, parking. It was one of the biggest topics that we heard from our survey, and today we're going to dig into the feelings, the facts, and some of the possible solutions to the frustration that our village residents and our visitors are experiencing. I'm Johnna McCooey. I'm the Executive Director at Fairport OSED, and I'm joined again today by Amy Olds.
Hello.
And we have a special guest, Jill Wiedrick. She is the village planner in Fairport and playing the role of resident expert in parking for our village today. Mm-hmm. Jill, can you introduce yourself and tell the folks a little bit about yourself?
Sure. So I have been doing planning and zoning for almost 20 years now. Wow. And I have experience doing urban, rural, suburban. And so I've got a lot of knowledge and had a lot of experiences. And oftentimes the conversation comes up about parking.
I bet.
And it's not unique to the Village of Fairport.
Mm-hmm. But the reason the Village of Fairport is experiencing more issues around parking is because of all of the exciting growth that we've seen over the past decade or so. So while we're excited to welcome that growth, it's important to recognize that with that growth has come some growing pains, and we heard that loud and clear from some of the survey comments. So let's talk about what were some of those themes in the survey.
Yeah. I mean, parking, the word parking came up almost 100 times in the comments. So definitely the most mentioned thing, almost always in tandem with also the desire to maintain the charm of the village, which I was just talking right before recording how interesting that juxtaposition is of wanting more parking, but not wanting to lose the charm. And to me, those things definitely kind of fight each other a little bit. And no one, I think, would love the idea of the village being a complete parking lot or, you know, more asphalt, more parking, more cars all over the place. But even though parking was mentioned the most, it leads me to believe that the charm is truly the most important, and that it's the frustration of the congestion at certain times that is more. The need for parking is more that perception of I can't be where I want when I want, unless I need more parking lots.
I would agree with that. And you know, we talk about perception being reality. So if someone has come into the village and they haven't or had the opportunity to get a spot immediately, or they've struggled to find a parking spot, for them, that's a big deal. Mm-hmm. So the question becomes, well, what do we do about that? Mm-hmm. And still preserve the charm of Fairport? Because just as you mentioned in your survey, you know, we're in the midst of a zoning code update. We did a lot of public outreach, and we heard the same thing. Mm-hmm. We heard things about parking, but for the most part, we heard preserve the Village of Fairport. And so there's a struggle with how do you make both things happen?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So you mentioned that parking is always a frustration wherever you go. And we talked about the character. What particular about Fairport right now are the main contributors to that frustration?
I think it's a multitude of factors. Mm-hmm. I think in some instances, it's that people aren't aware of where those public parking lots are.
That's a big one.
I think in some instances, it's people not being comfortable parking on street.
Okay.
You know, you think about how many people, when they took their road test, really enjoyed parallel parking, right? Maybe 5 out of the 10 million.
I parallel parked here today, and I was like, watch me parallel park. So excited.
I wish I'd have been watching.
So I think that's some of the issue. I think one of the things that we did do with the zoning code update. So the zoning code update is obviously this huge project that looked to modernize the zoning code for the Village of Fairport, acknowledge the uses that are here, and really bring requirements up to the expectations of the community, but also where we want to go towards the future. And so parking being a discussion amongst people, we did a parking study.
Okay.
And that parking study, the intent was to not only inform us as village staff and administration to figure out, okay, what do we have here? What do we need to do? It also was a document that informed how we created those parking requirements for the zoning code update. Okay. So what that document said is, hey, you've got enough parking
Uh-oh.
But there are times
You sure about that?
when some of the parking lots are over that 80% number. So in the planning world, we want to see parking lots filled up about 80%. That's an ideal situation so that there's enough turnover. There's people that are going in and out. People can pull into that parking lot and go, oh, I see 2 or 3 spaces. They feel like they can park there.
That makes sense.
And there are some instances that were revealed, and this study was done on multiple days at multiple times during different seasons, that said, hey, some of these lots are maybe beyond capacity.
Okay. So there is some truth there, certain times, certain places. And I think, going back to the feeling of it, I think we, might not want to move forward too quickly into the study details because just as somebody, like from a community member's perspective, maybe they were like, I don't know what that study says, but my body says I was mad as heck when I couldn't find a spot that day in the lot I wanted to be in, and I wanted to go to that shop at this time, and there was no way I was ever going to get there.
Oh, for sure. And don't forget, the study is a snapshot in time, right? So, and I live in the Village, so I experience this. There are times that I walk into the Village because I know that parking perhaps is going to be a little bit challenging for me. I don't want to deal with the frustration, as you mentioned. There are other times that, granted, we have 6 public parking lots.
That's a lot,
which
isn't it?
is a lot
Okay,
for a community of our size. There are times that I come, and one of the public parking lots is actually behind Village Hall. I will park there, and I will walk all the way around the Village. The cool thing is that there are a lot of interesting things to walk by. And I think a lot of that is because of the efforts of OSED, right? So we have now updated facades. We have more businesses in these cute little shops. So perhaps 10 years ago, to park in a public parking lot and make that trek down to, portions of North Main, there may not have been anything to really look at. Maybe you were bored. It's creating that excitement. And I think OSED has helped do that.
Yeah, we're actually, of course, so proud of our contributions to the development that's happened in downtown Fairport. At the same time, we're really cognizant of our role to also be a steward for that character that really makes Fairport Fairport. And as, of course, we want to continue to plan for the future, because that's really what economic development is. It's the things that we talk about and work on are really going to come to fruition in 5 years, 10 years, or 20 years, right? We're not planning for today, we're planning for what's coming. And part of that planning does have to be the parking, the solutions to the parking pains that we're experiencing right now. So OSED and the Village partner together to work on solutions that meet both the goals in the comprehensive plan, the goals in the OSED strategic plan, which ultimately come from the feedback of our residents, the community engagement that both of our organizations do when we're building these plans. So you mentioned all of the public lots and parking at behind Village Hall and walking to all the different lots. Amy and I were talking in the office and saying, okay, let's talk about all the lots. Even after working there for a year, you go, well, what are all those lots? Yeah. So part of it is that emotion tied to, like, I know this place and I want to drive there. Yeah, and that's where I want to put my car. And I might not even think about, oh, well, there's an alternative just not even a block away. So I live with my frustration instead of knowing about those solutions. So those are other things as a village and OSED that we can take that feedback and go, okay, we might have the stuff, but we need to make sure people know about it.
Communicating and opportunities for educating. I mean, residents also can help with this because here I'm just speaking about my mother coming to visit, right? I'll say, "Oh, you can park here," and she'll say, didn't even know that was there." Like the Junction lot, I didn't know that was public. As a newer to Fairport person that works and commutes every day, some of our most big, largest public lots are rightfully hidden. Yes. I would say they should be.
Good design. Yes.
Good design. But because of that, signage becomes more important. Education becomes more important. Now we're in this more modern day where social media channels need to be showcasing that. There are opportunities to guide the public, both residents and visitors, to some of these hidden lots and make everyone feel more comfortable and not be as frustrated just because they can't park in that one lot that they always parked in to go to the library or something like that.
Yeah. So back to the emotion of it.
Yeah.
I feel like I know this place and I'm comfortable there. So the feelings are real. Let's get into the facts of parking. We've been talking about all our lots. Let's talk about it. Jill, do we have enough parking lots, parking spaces in Fairport? What does the data say?
The data says yes. And as I mentioned earlier, we're in a situation where there are some uses in the village that perhaps operate late at night and draw a large crowd late at night. And so those lots are typically seeing more challenges. And when I say challenges, as I mentioned earlier, the ideal number is 80% for a parking lot to be filled. The data revealed that it could be over 100%. And when we say over 100%, that means that somebody created a parking
Yeah, a
spot.
little illegal parking,
Yes.
pull it up on a curb, that
which
kind of
can
thing.
be a little bit challenging
Yeah.
when we're thinking about emergency services, right? So probably somebody says, well, why do you mark it and you're so specific as to where people can park? Well, we also make sure if there's an emergency that people can easily get in and out.
Yeah, that's a thought I hadn't really thought of in the research for this episode.
Yeah, so that's key to make sure that we're designing parking lots properly. Not only that the public can get in and out, but emergency services.
And the safety of walkers too. And we
Correct.
talk about being a walkable village and our desire to enhance that even further. But you can't have a line of cars circling a parking lot, circling, hovering for a space, and there's people trying to walk, up a sidewalk pathway to the cannery, for example.
Right.
And it's not good.
And when you have a walkable community, you want to decrease the number of curb cuts. So that means entrances to private property from the street, right? And that speaks to, hey, we want to be walkable. We have to ensure that there's parking because obviously people are still coming to our community via car. How do we accommodate all of those users to make sure people have a space, people can walk to that area? It's a challenge. So the study said, hey, this is what's going on at these lots during these snapshots in time. This document can be used to inform policy going forward, the zoning code update, and whatever sort of things that we're doing in the future.
So that leads me to think that certain lots are reaching capacity at certain times, but that doesn't necessarily mean that the lots a few blocks away are being utilized to their best, most effective.
Yes, that's very true. And as you mentioned before, the concern of, do people really know where all these lots are, right? So I know where all the lots are.
I'm learning.
And so if I am coming downtown, and I call it downtown, people are probably like, it's the center of, Fairport, right? It's our downtown. If I'm coming downtown and I know that there's going to be challenges maybe in those parking opportunities north of the railroad tracks, maybe I'm parking in the landing parking lot because some of those uses operate until 5. So I'm parking there and I'm walking because it's interesting to walk, and I'm passing by some of the stores that have window decorations. You go by the canal, all these great things. But not everybody is aware that there are other opportunities to park. And so it's on us as community members, just as you mentioned, to provide that education, to make sure people know that there are other opportunities for parking. And that was one of the summary suggestions that came out of this parking study is, okay, so you have these parking spaces, but what are you doing to ensure that they're managed appropriately? So there are a lot of different things that you can do. One of the suggestions that's really intriguing to me, when you go to the Rochester Airport and you park in the parking garage and you go in and there's a sign that tells you on whatever level are there spaces. And when you look up, there's lights that are either red or green, right? So that's fantastic. There are surface lots in the United States that have some sort of mechanism like that it'll tell you how many spaces are available in that lot. That's really useful for some communities. And when we talk about parking being a topic for everyone, It's literally a topic for everyone. In fact, I had sent a text to my brother and I said, hey, I'm going to be on a podcast. We're going to talk about parking. He said, and he lives in New York City. And he said, well, let me tell you about the parking in New York City. Okay. And so it's a conversation that everybody is having. And so it's how do we educate people as to where the lots are, use different means to let people know not only where those lots are, but how many spaces are available in those lots. All of those things also cost money, right? So then it's a trade-off.
And some, bringing it back to our downtown revitalization initiative, proposed conceptual projects, some of them were informed by this study that you're referencing and some of our goals both at OSED and the Village, and the concept of our little cute trolley program that might be something that we could explore, our concept of enhanced wayfinding and signage. There are let me try to say
tools.
This. There are tools we can utilize and things that, when I say wayfinding and signage, someone might say, we don't need more signs. Like they just think of a road sign or a street sign, but signs can do a lot more. To your point, maybe down the road, how amazing it would be to dream of a big sign that could show you a green light. But at the end of the day, at least we could start with a sign that says there's public parking over here.
Right.
I mean, you got to start somewhere.
So, definitely. The facts are that there actually is an abundance of parking in the Village of Fairport. The challenge is there are hotspots also in the Village of Fairport. So you can't always park exactly where you want to, exactly when you want to park there. And so people do immediately go to the easy answer, we should build more parking. And that's a challenge because of a lot of reasons. One, building more parking isn't free. Maintaining the new parking that you build is not free. And the real value cost of building parking instead of something else, does that really meet that criteria of preserving the character of the Village of Fairport? If we want more parking, would we tear down a vacant building on Main Street because we could build a parking lot there? I think we would hear a resounding no to that from our residents. So we're
looking to reduce frustration, not add more spaces.
Yes, and if we didn't have enough spaces, then of course we would have to look at that as you can do all these other things, but you just don't have enough spaces. But foundationally, we have enough spaces. We recognize that those feelings and frustrations, of course, are real. And so the next part of this conversation are, what are the solutions? And those are the things that a few of the things that you just mentioned. But it's also important to remember why the number one solution is not just build more parking.
Yeah.
Would we value parking over land that could be developed for other purposes? What does the survey tell us from that perspective?
Yeah, I was, before we get into that, I was thinking so much about you saying like the walk was more enjoyable, and that made me think of how OSED provides sign and frontage grants to business owners and property owners and developers to enhance not only their Main Street facing property, but we view the canal as our second Main Street. Yes. So also any frontage on the canal or along the canal is eligible for that grant funding through OSED. And that is more than just making it look nicer. It's enhancing the experience, and it's making it so that I feel safe and comfortable and excited to walk down Main Street. Safety, big issue. All of that new Main Streetscape project that we just are completing, the new sidewalks, the new lamp posts, so much is happening and the groundwork is being laid, and each of these elements plays a little piece of the big picture, which makes it not feel like the worst thing ever to have to walk a block. And some of the solutions we should talk about, though, are that makes me think again of the folks that can't walk the block. And I think it's important that we have that discussion too, whether it's now or in a little bit.
Absolutely. And when you talk about, the facade changes that we've seen just over the last couple of years that, we've had the planning board review, and it was part of their change was driven by that OSED opportunity. That makes, when we talk about feelings, the way something looks makes people feel a certain way. So we talk about planning and we talk about zoning, but at the end of the day, it's how do you feel about that area? And I think the investment that has occurred has made people feel good about it and consider parking once and walking, right? Now, you bring up about different people get places different means. And they also may be doing that in different seasons of their lives. So I always talk about my own personal experience a lot. I have been on crutches, been in a cast, da. And so if there is perhaps a ramp, whether it be on the sidewalk or going into a structure, that's key for me, right? And I'm not 85 or 90, have any sort of mobility challenge other than temporary. But then maybe a couple years later, I've got kids and now I have a stroller. So it's also important while we're having the conversation about parking is to make sure that parking is in a good location to provide opportunities for everyone. And also within that we're designing places that make them accessible for all. Yeah. Right. And we also talk about being multimodal. So the idea of the trolley, the idea of being able to park, biking, right? The second Main Street, the canal, that path, a lot of people will bike from Pittsford, to say, oh, I'm going to go for lunch at wherever, or I'm going to come in and go shopping. So part of our efforts with the zoning code update was to say, okay, we know we have to require parking and we have to address this, but we also want to make sure that we're also encouraging other modes of transportation. So biking, requiring bike racks on properties, making sure that people are considering other means of transportation, not just vehicle, because we have to strike that balance. And, the administration has said, we want to be the most walkable community in New York State. How do you do that? Make sure that you have an opportunity for anybody, whatever way they want to get to the Village of Fairport, they have that chance.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And that kind of brings us around, even if they are coming in their car, we would love them to come in your car, park once, like you said, and explore our village on foot, however you might do that.
It's freeing. It's freeing. I would I challenge everyone to try it. One of my first days working here in the village, I went out at lunch and just was amazed at how freeing it felt to just walk around and not be having the vehicle tied. It's kind of a burden, and you do kind of feel free when you're like, like I could walk over there and I could get over there and I could go grab a coffee and I don't have to worry about where I'm parking my car because I don't got one.
That's another great point. Whether you're a resident or a worker in Fairport, you do start to develop more walking habits, right? You walk to your meeting, you walk to get your coffee, you walk from home down to the canal because you're maybe aware of some of those parking challenges or it's easier. So the issue might also be, how do we change the mindsets of the people coming to our village, right? Not just the people who are familiar with the village who know, I'm going to park here and easily walk there. I'm going to avoid this part of Main Street at a busy time. The people coming to enjoy our wonderful village don't have that, awareness. So that is probably the bigger challenge. How do we educate, inform, change the mindset of the visitors so they also want to embrace the walkability and embrace the character and charm during their experience in Fairport?
I think it's a feeling. It goes back to the feeling and the facade. And I think about if I go to a community on the same scale as the Village of Fairport or even, a city, I might drive through once, get a lay of the land, park once and walk. Because now I've seen, well, if I park in this lot, I can walk down and there's all these stores.
Church Street, where Fairport Brewing is, and the Baptist Church, that 4 corners to the cannery is less than half a mile. We mapped it out. And so, you think, wow, that's pretty short, dense downtown district. Yeah. So obviously super walkable. I could park at one end and literally be at the other end in less than 10 minutes, and that's like a leisurely stroll. So it's the education of
Right.
it.
It's that mindset that you were
Mindset.
talking about as that visitor.
Yeah, but I think the key is to have interesting uses, interesting buildings, right? So it's relying on design very much. And I think not to harp on the OSED facade grant, but
We like it.
but that's really something that has maybe a bigger impact than anything else we might do is how does it look? Is it inviting? So imagine if we had all these boarded up shops, okay, but we had maybe 2 anchor establishments and I had to walk between. I might not be interested in doing that, but it's the fact that we have interesting things. I'm more apt to park and walk.
Yeah.
Great.
From a marketing standpoint,
Yep.
before we move on, my mind immediately goes to just the education of it all, getting the word out. I think about how before Canal Days, there is a huge push for where you're going to park and how you're going to park over here and you're going to take a shuttle in maybe and you're going to do this, that. All those channels are open year round. Like our social media channels, signage, all of our merchants themselves have the ability to share information about parking. Or did you know we have a shuttle like for the holiday season going on? And little nuggets of information. Or I park over there. Did you not know that's a lot? So we can all, I think, do a better job of that. And the idea of treating regular weekends like an event, as far as like the marketing of it, I think is an opportunity that could be explored.
I like that. And we were talking and preparing for this episode about the concept of smarter parking management and being more innovative in how we approach this challenge. And we're big on that in the Village of Fairport, right? We want to try different things and be a leader in what makes a great community. And so we hear that parking is a challenge everywhere. What a great opportunity for us to, how about let's solve that, at least for us, in the ways that we can. And the ways that we can do that with a whole array of tools. We've talked about some of them. We've talked about the facade grant contributing to a better feeling and the messaging. Let's talk about some of the real specific, down and dirty, what could we do? We know that we could build another parking lot and we could pave another part of Paradise if we want to do that. But I think based on the feedback that we got from the survey and understanding that preserving the character of what makes Fairport is way more important than build another parking lot. So let's talk about what are some of those specific ways that could get done.
I mean, we were, in preparing for the episode, going a little bit into the concept of timed spaces, and that we haven't really fully embraced the concept of, hey, this is a UPS store and people come in and get out pretty darn quickly. So should there be a spot that's a flash or only 15-minute thing? We aren't doing that right now. So instead the lot will be taken up by someone that's going to be there all day. They're at the library with their kid for a reading hour and they're not moving their car for 2 hours. So the idea of analyzing where certain places are that people want to get in, get out, or it's more errand focused is different than parking for a longer term thing. I don't know. That's
so
one
what are
thing.
some of those specific tools that you've seen municipalities, cities, towns use to deal with some of these parking challenges? Because one thing that we love to say in Fairport, we have an abundance of parking and it's all free.
Yes.
And
900
that's so great.
spaces plus.
But how often do you go somewhere where there's just so much free parking? Unless it's like a mall. But I don't think anyone in our village wants our downtown to feel like a mall or a suburban shopping
not at
plaza.
all. But I think one of the things that we have to, as I don't want to just say Americans, but as Americans, as people, we have to recognize that parking is never free. So you go to Eastview Mall and you go, oh, I just parked and I didn't have to pay. However, that parking is rolled into that item that you paid for, right? So is it a hidden cost, or is it I parked and I paid with my app, or I parked and I paid with a machine? So one of the things that a lot of communities are now considering, because when you take into account that a parking space can cost between $5,000 and $10,000, that's significant. right?
$5,000 to $10,000 to build. Does that include the annual maintenance?
No. So that's just to build. And when we're talking about constructing a parking lot, it's not just, well, I'm going to roll the ground and I'm going to put down some asphalt. There's significant investment that oftentimes has to happen related to drainage and curb cuts and all of these things, landscaping, all of these things you don't know about.
Investment and impact, as you're saying.
Impact, right. Yeah. So,
yeah, and then they'll be complaining about a pothole. So,
yes. So, at what point do communities say we now have to charge for parking? And I think a lot of the places that I go, I've downloaded a couple parking apps because there was a period of time that I worked in the city. And so I would pay every morning with my app, and it was easy. And with that app, I've parked in 100 different communities, and it's easy. My license plate is in there. My credit card information's in there. The beauty of that is it sends me a little message and says, hey, you only have 15 minutes left. I can add on to it. So that's one of the things that communities have said, hey, this is an opportunity for us to say parking isn't free. And also, when we're charging for parking, it ensures turnover.
That, I think, is, as somebody who, I love to park free all the time. Of course, I want to park free, like free to me.
Yeah.
But you make me think about how there are millions of studies out there that showcase that having some of the parking paid actually is a really good thing, not from a money-making perspective even, but from a getting people where they want to be when they want to be there. Because if I am going to pay for 2 hours in this special lot, that might be worth $2 to me. It's worth $2 to me to know that I can park there versus I would rather walk a block and have it be free. And then you start to filter folks to where they are more comfortable and their comfort level. And, if you don't want to pay the $2, then you walk a block, And some folks might say, heck yeah, I'm going to pay $2. Yeah. I'm going to park right there.
So it's evaluating the value of that space.
That's
one way.
That's a way.
That's a way.
Not necessarily to say, just so everyone's clear, we're not. Don't worry, you don't have to roll up and pay for your parking in Fairport now.
That's right.
But that's a way,
it's
and
that
people should understand when they're talking about how do we manage this problem. Let's be cognizant of what approach are we taking right now to parking management. And right now, we're taking a low friction on the enforcement side of things, right? We have these free lots. There are some guidelines, but there is generally low enforcement because also enforcement costs money, right? Yes. It costs
and
money
time.
to have and time to have people driving it up and down the parking lots and driving up and down the street and ticketing cars. That's a factor in having meters on the street. Well, then you have to enforce it, and you can't do one without the other.
Yeah. Enforcement
is also a tool, and so we have to be evaluating how do we balance those two things.
I liked the analogy you used when we were talking in preparation for this episode about the toolkit, that it's not one solution that's going to magically make our parking frustrations disappear. It's a little of this and a little of that. You need this tool, you need that tool, and it's an exploration of different small things that could add up to a significant impact.
And potentially at different times, right? So we talk about right now, we don't charge for parking. Who's to say in 10 years we might think differently about that, right? I think the other thing that we can try to do is encourage on-street parking. I know it's not everybody's go-to, but there are on-street parking spaces. And sometimes those historically have more turnover, which is a good thing, right? So if there's an on-street parking space in front of my store, somebody pulls in, they get what they need to do, they leave, right? So we've got a lot of on-street parking available too. And it behooves people to consider that as well.
Talk about the whole concept of shared parking, because that was sort of new to me.
I love shared parking.
I mentioned it and I got intrigued and might be interesting to some of our audience members.
So I am a map person. And so I took an aerial map of our village and I looked at the commercial areas and said, what are we talking about in paved area? When I talk about paved area, that's public parking spaces and private parking spaces, okay? In our little downtown, we have 21 acres of paved area, okay? And if you look at a conservative number of, let's say, 100 parking spaces per acre, we're talking potentially in our downtown area of 2,100 parking spaces. Now, the question becomes, are we using those correctly? We know that we have some businesses that are maybe open from, let's say, 9 to 5. Others operate from 5 to 11, 5 to 2 a.m., whatever that might look like. So there's some overlap in how we can utilize those spaces. So I always encourage people, don't necessarily create more parking on your lot or your property, but consider sharing parking with your neighbors. So if I'm a business and I operate from 9 to 5, and the business next door maybe has 15 parking spaces and they don't open until 6, I could say to them, hey, could we enter into agreement where I'm utilizing your spaces for X dollars, a month? Then I'm not creating my own parking. I know that people that are coming to my store now have parking. So the more that we can have the conversation about sharing and being thoughtful about what do we have and how do we best use it, I think it's better for everyone.
Yeah, absolutely. Another thing that we talked about from a toolkit perspective is policy. And you mentioned the draft zoning code updates. Tell me about policy changes in the zoning code that are specific to parking.
So again, the study really informed this. And not only did the study consider how many parking spaces we have, public parking spaces, and how they're being utilized, but it also said, okay, if we do a max build out to inform then what uses are allowed in those zoning districts, what are we looking at? What can we handle and not be a burden to the parking we currently have, right? Mm-hmm. Because again, we talk about preserving that charm, and part of that is not tearing down buildings and making more parking. So we have to be very, very considerate of that. So we took all of that data, we looked at how different communities are dealing with parking, and a lot of communities are saying, we're not doing a parking minimum anymore. Because why should we tell you, I'm a planner, I don't know how much parking your restaurant needs. You tell me, right? So the draft code at this point says any structure that is over 4,000 square feet has to produce a parking plan. And there are different means that you can get to that, whatever number you settle on. I need X amount of spaces, and this is how I'm getting them. I may be sharing parking. I'm maybe having an Uber space on my site. I'm maybe encouraging biking. I've got a bike rack. All those elements go into it. And you're probably thinking, well, how did you settle on 4,000? We looked at the sizes currently of the structures that are on Main Street and said, what makes sense to ensure that a smaller building isn't having to submit every time there's a change in use.
Removing any roadblocks is a good thing.
How am I meeting parking? We included that in there to make sure that somebody's telling us what you require. And we're thinking, if you're telling us, you know your business best.
And then is there a dialogue that happens, or potentially?
Yes. So if there is a structure that's over 4,000, they produce a parking plan that has to go before the planning board. And that's the opportunity for that conversation, right? To really kind of peel apart and say, does it make sense?
And that plan can utilize or take advantage of public parking that exists as long as they have thought through their real need and when they're going to be using it, and have some good whys behind the answer. Why can this lot support your need?
Like a reasonable
and I think a little bit of data too. We had an applicant that I said, hey, you're looking to claim these public parking spots, but I'm really encouraging you to maybe on a couple different nights go out and really count how many are available. And so they did that for their application so that the planning board had an idea of what is the reality here. Because obviously the planning board members are residents. They know what those parking issues may or may not be. But for an applicant to say, this is the reality of what's going on in this lot, and because of that, I'm accommodating my parking needs by X, Y, and Z, that's helpful. The other thing that I think is a little bit forward thinking is that we've also addressed parking maximums. We don't want you to pave over every inch of your property, right? So if you're saying, I need X amount of spaces, and it's over what we think you should have, you've got to come and have a conversation with the planning board and justify why that's necessary.
Okay.
So we've looked at a couple different tools to not only allow for different uses to come in and provide the amount of parking that they feel is necessary, but also ensure that we're not losing valuable land to the creation of parking. So it's that balance.
It's all about
Great.
balance.
It's always about balance,
I know, it
right?
really is.
So thank you for sharing that. I know that you've been working for a long time on the zoning updates, and it's exciting to think and understand that they're really already ways that we're using these tools to address these problems. And so I would love to talk about. We've talked about the feelings and the facts and the things that we can do. What excites me is that we actually are doing a lot of the things,
Yeah.
right? You talked about the policy changes that we're making. Amy, you mentioned in our DRI application the trolley project, and folks might not know much about that.
Yeah, we should get into that a minute. We have this concept of a trolley, whether or not it's specific night and weekend operations. There's many conceptual concepts.
Yeah.
Ideas that of when and how it could work. But the idea is that it could alleviate some of the congestion up and down Main
Yeah.
Street, the circling.
Especially for visitors to the community, right? If I'm coming from someplace other than Fairport, I'm probably coming up 31F. Wouldn't it be great if I just got used to pulling my car right into this public parking lot, hopping on the trolley, and making my way down Main Street?
Plus,
I can
it's
get
cute.
on and off. I can head down to the popular hotspots. I can avoid fighting traffic there.
Yeah, or you could take an
And-
Uber to the trolley station. Maybe
exactly.
you're going all in on
Right.
on the public transit
But
and the private
I think
opportunities.
it's exciting too, because if you think about, we talk about creating a community for 8 to 80. And,
that.
when you've got little kids, they don't necessarily want to walk far.
Right.
They
right.
want to ride a trolley.
And maybe I have been running around all day and I don't want to walk far, right? Or maybe I'm on crutches, or I'm got a sports injury. That trolley has the potential to drop people off within close proximity of where they're looking to go.
Plus, it builds and adds to the character of Fairport, which I think is something that we continuously are looking for opportunities to lean into. How to build upon that charm, and the
Yes.
trolley project is one of those. Other things that were DRI related were enhanced wayfinding and
Yep.
signage. Is that it? That
There,
directly tie in?
There is enhanced wayfinding and signage. There's the trolley project, not part of the DRI, but other things that we're already doing is the streetscape
Yep.
project that we just completed. People might go, oh, new sidewalks. Everybody has sidewalks. These sidewalks are so accessible. They're wide and they're even. I know
The
this is a
crosswalks.
common thing in any urban area where you have trees planted. The trees were heaving, the sidewalks, and everything was just a little bit helter-skelter if you were in a wheelchair or on crutches or have a stroller.
Or a runner.
Or a
and
runner,
For me
right.
as a runner, when I run on Main Street prior to the reconstruction, I was full of
I'm
lots
just
of
a
anxiety,
klutzy walker.
right? Thinking I've got to watch not only ahead of me but below me to make sure I don't trip and fall. So I think for everyone to have these new sidewalks, not only do they look amazing, and if you haven't had the opportunity yet, either drive down Main Street at 5 a.m. when it's still dark, or at 5 p.m., which is now
Dark.
and just look at the way the street looks now.
Yeah.
And when we talk about feelings, you feel different.
Yeah.
And I think
it's
that
very
adds
nice.
to it. Not only do we now have a smooth surface for people to traverse, but it looks really good.
Yeah.
Yeah. It does. It looks great. And all of these things are the tools in the toolkit to address that problem. And that's kind of the message we want to leave people with is there isn't a one flavor solution. Just like parking isn't a one flavor issue. We've talked a lot about the different needs of different parkers and different visitors to our community. And we just want folks to remember that it's not one solution, it's all the solutions, but also to know and feel confident that together, as O said, in a village, we hear you, we're working towards those solutions, and we encourage new businesses, new developments to always be working with us towards those solutions. So it might seem stressful and frustrating, but one takeaway I would love for people to have from this conversation is to know that there are many thoughtful conversations and real work going towards this issue that are bringing already the streetscapes, the potential with the trolley, the policy changes, solutions that are going to alleviate this problem. So we're not just throwing up our hands and going, parking's a problem for everyone. It is a problem for everyone, but we're going to dig in and do something great. Do you guys have any closing thoughts?
I mean, I would just add to that the conversation is ongoing with the community still, and that you should still chime in. Feel free to write to us. If you have any ideas or maybe visited another community where you saw some sort of unique solution that could potentially have legs in Fairport, that would be really interesting to hear from folks. I know that the residents are people that feel and see the effects of pilot programs probably the quickest, because they're doing these things every day and they're here every day. So it's the community members and the residents that I feel whose opinions have the most, what's the word I'm looking for? The most weight to them. Like, we want to hear from you, because
Definitely.
you are the ones that are feeling these feelings that are very real every day, and most able to help analyze and measure
And
how
shape the
solutions are working.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And my door is always open. Just as Amy mentioned, I love to hear about where people traveled and, how they propose that we ensure that we're developing a multimodal community. Beyond that, there are times where any of these projects might be for a land use board. And that's the opportunity for the public to come in and say, you know what, have you thought about this? Have you thought about that? We really emphasize the diversity of thought, and we want the community to be involved. So if you see an issue or something on a particular project that you're like, that could be better, come to these meetings, provide comment, provide feedback. The only way we continue to build an awesome Fairport is through community engagement.
Love it. That's exactly how we ended up here today, community
is.
engagement. So keep bringing it, folks.
Awesome.
Great. So with that, we're going to close. Our next episode is going to be on that really real most important topic, the character of our village and how we preserve that in balance with how we focus on growth and planning for the future. So excited to get into that next time. Thank you so much, Jill, for all your insights and
Thank you, Jill.
knowledge. And I think we're going to fix this parking thing, or at least improve it for our village.
Awesome.
Great.
Thank you.